Israel since the Oslo Accord in 1994. I've been teaching international politics in teacher education at universities, and I have worked for the United Nations in Gaza for a couple of years, and also for United Nations in Ukraine from 2014 to 2019 part-time. Now, this lecture here is based on my experiences and also what I've studied during the time I've been working down there. Should I just start?
Yes, why not? If any of you have any questions during the presentation and it relates to what Oyvind is saying, then you can raise your hand, type it in the chat, or politely ask if you can ask a question. And otherwise, I give the word to Oyvind. I cannot find him now. That is interesting. I'll send him a message. I'm sure he will come back soon.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Eric. I am from Brazil. I am in Brazilian Amazon region, and my internet in moment is very slow. Sorry.
Nice that you're here. You
nice.
are what's it called? 1 second, I'll send the message to Oyvind. There he is. Co-host. Okay, welcome back, Oyvind. Is it all right technically on your side?
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fine, good. Now, I will share the screen with you. If you have any comments or questions while I'm talking, please feel free and just interrupt. Otherwise, I'll just keep on talking.
Okay.
Okay. The year is 2008, and I was in Gaza, standing with Majed. He was the headmaster of a primary school, and we were standing there looking at his school, or rather what was left of it. It had been bombed a month ago. I was picking up some paper, dusting around between my feet. It was a workbook for kids, children, school children, where they were trying to learn to write Arabic and some drawings. I had been at the same school 10 years earlier with Majed. By then, I was working for the Norwegian Union of Teachers, a trade union, which cooperated with the Palestinian trade union for teachers. And I was traveling around in the whole West Bank in Gaza, giving courses and training Palestinian teachers in how to run a modern democratic trade union. I was learning them about open economy, elections, etc., all these things that define a modern, open, democratic trade union. That was in 1998. And I was at the same school with a lot of teachers. In 2005, there was elections in West Bank and Gaza, democratic elections supported by the teachers. The Palestinian teachers helped in implementing the voting and the elections. And according to international observers, the whole thing was open and fair, in contrast to many other elections. Now, at that elections in 2005, Hamas won both on the West Bank and Gaza, to their own and to the whole international society's surprise. But Hamas, who was opposed to Israel, was not approved, and therefore many countries cut their aid to Palestine, and Israel closed the borders with walls, barbed wire, etc., and started fighting against Hamas. In the West Bank, Fatah, the other Palestinian group, won the power. Now, after Israel had besieged, meaning making totally close the borders to Gaza, a couple of years later, they started bombing in 2008, the so-called Cast-Lead War, the first big war against Gaza. And after that war, I came in there on behalf of the United Nations, and I met Majed, and he showed me his school, completely destroyed. And while we were looking there, he looked up to me, Riley, and he said softly, "We tried your democracy, see what happened to us." That is very much the picture, the situation down there. Palestine has been left by the international society in their, let's say, struggle against occupation and against Israel. They have claimed and are referring to international laws, principles, regulations, etc. But it seems very few of those are relevant for Palestine, while Israel gets support all over, and mostly from the United States. So this is a long time ongoing conflict, and it has been, let's say, the mother of all conflicts, because it is quiet for a while and then it starts up again. This picture went viral or worldwide in 2001 with this little boy throwing stones at Israeli tanks. He did that before he went to school. That was his morning procedure, throwing stones at the tanks. Then he went to school, and then he threw some more stones when he went back to home. He was killed after a month. It is a complicated conflict. Mainly, it is a conflict between two parties that want to establish a nation or a state on the same area, the Jews and the Palestinians. But this struggle is being complicated because of religion, or rather ideology, meaning Zionism, and foreign interests, United States especially, and also because it is being affected by huge historical events like the Iraq War, etc., the Suez War, etc., which changed the whole picture, the whole conflict and the facts on the ground. But the main conflict for the time being, and since the Second World War, is that one part is occupying and the other part is being occupied. That is the basic picture of the whole thing. This is if you want to go travel into the biggest Palestinian city on the West Bank, Hebron. This is a sign that you meet. It says this road leads to Area A under the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden. It's dangerous to your lives, and it is against Israeli law. Nothing is correct. It is not forbidden for Israeli citizens to go there. Many do, or rather, some do for the time being. But being dangerous to your life, yes, if you don't know how to behave and if you don't know what to do, and it is not against Israeli law. So this is a picture which is being, let's say, implemented in the Israeli mind, that the Palestinian areas, they are dangerous. The second is if you try to get into Jerusalem, meaning Israeli-controlled areas, you have to pass these guys after you have been through a gate. Everybody has to get out. All your luggage is being checked. If you don't have a license to enter into the area, the Israeli area, you are getting arrested. And then either you are being taken somewhere, left out in the desert, or going to jail or whatever. So when there is a bus coming here, it's being stopped. All Arabs has to go out, get down on their knees, and they are being searched for all kinds of weapons or whatever. This is a picture from Warsaw, 1943, the Jewish ghetto, which revolted against the Nazis, where the Nazis built a wall around them and then started bombing the whole thing. This is when they surrendered after half a year's fighting. And this is famous. It's from my history book in primary school. And the picture here with a Nazi soldier, let's say, pointing at the Jewish boy, that is from 1943. This is outside Bethlehem today, or rather picture taken in 2002, where the Israeli soldier is afraid because he thinks that the boy might hide a bomb or something. That is a regular picture in the West Bank for the today. And now Gaza, demolished and more or less completely destroyed. What and who do we talk about? It's an area which takes 2 hours to drive across from the Mediterranean to Jordan, or 6 hours to drive from Lebanon to Egypt. It's a very small area compared to most European countries. In Israel, approximately 9 million people, of which a fifth, 20%, are in fact Palestinians, or what the Israelis call Israel Arabs, because they don't name them Palestinians. In the Palestinian areas, meaning West Bank and Gaza, approximately 6 million, where half of them are defined by the UN as refugees. And then there is another 4.5 million Palestinian refugees outside the Israeli-Palestinian areas. The area is a focal point for 3 monotheistic religions, meaning Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Here is the what's it called? Haram al-Sharif. It's the cliff dome, where, according to the Quran, Muhammad went down to the earth and had a talk with Jesus before he again went up to heaven. Just outside the picture to the right, it's the Wailing Wall. That is what the remnants of David's chapel, which is the most holy place for the Jews. And I'm standing in front of the Golgotha where Jesus was crucified, meaning you have the main religious centers for 3 different religions, just a stone throw between each other. It takes 10 minutes to walk from the Golgotha to the cliff dome to the Wailing Wall. And the other picture is the main entrance into the old Jerusalem, which is the focal point for all these. It's been a strategic important trade route and they, of course, then a very important place, religious place, for these three religions, and therefore have been let's say the attacked and conquests and occupations for 2, 3, 4,000 years. This is the area, very small, in the bottom of the Mediterranean, surrounded by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. The beginning of the problem may be the Jews when they revolted against the Roman occupation, Caesar and all these guys, because they occupied the whole area, but the Jews revolted several times, and after a while the Romans got fed up of them and forced all of them to leave the area in the year 67. That is what the Jews called the diaspora. And then they were spread all over the world, into Russia, Europe, America, North Africa, Iran, etc., etc. So therefore, let's say the common thinking among the Jews is that we belong down there in Palestine, but we were kicked out by the Romans in the year 67, and we long to get back there. So the question is, what is a Jew? A Jew is a person born by a Jewish mother and who have not denounced his or her Judaism, and a person who has converted to Judaism. That means it is an ethnical, partly religious definition. It is not necessarily religion, it's more a cultural and an ethnical meaning. You get it from your mother, not as we do from our father, but here is from your mother. So the few Jews who were left there in year 67, and Christians and Muslims have lived together peacefully for centuries in Palestine. The problem was created a couple 100 years ago. And there is a variety of Jews, different cultural backgrounds, depending on where they come from, European, Arabs, African, Iranian, or whatever, and a very different religions. Basically, they have the Judaism, some of them, but many Jews, they are atheists or reformistic or whatever. And you have those Orthodox, which is the picture here. They have a rather special view of the world, meaning that this land was given to them by God. Those guys with those hats, etc., called the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, they do not work because they use all their time to study the Torah, which is their Bible, and they deny to go into military service, and they are paid by the state to do nothing as a kind of out of work compensation. So it is a economical problem and let's say political problem for the government, or used to be rather. They are many thousands, 10,000, almost 100,000 of them around. So you have Jews who are ultra-Orthodox. Some of them don't even believe in the Israeli state because Israel is supposed to be established by Yahweh, meaning God, when he returned to the earth. Or you have conservatives, you have mysticism, Messians, Samaritans, etc., secular Jews, and then you also have the Zionists, which I'm coming back to. Because Judaism is a kind of a worldview. It's based on the Torah, the Old Testament. It's a kind of way of living, and a worldview, where you talk about the people of Israel, the lesson of Israel, and the land of Israel. They have the idea of Eretz Israel, Greater Israel, which is based on the Torah, meaning the Old Testament, which is defining Israel as a huge area, including neighboring countries. They have no defined borders. It is stated or defined in the Old Testament. Judaism is therefore a culture and or religion, while Zionism is a political ideology. The basic idea for the Zionists is that the Jews is a separate nation, not only in belief, which they have had for 2,000 years, being homeless, kicked out by the Romans, but they therefore have the right for their own independent country. And Zionism also states that anti-Semitism, meaning anti-Jewism, is embedded in all non-Jewish societies, and that Jews cannot live safely in any other country. They talk about the pogroms and the Holocaust, etc., etc. Jews, therefore, must have a country on their own, where they know they can live safely. This was stated by Theodor Herzl in 1896, and then started mainly the problem. And many Jews do not agree with this idea at all. But it is the basis for the immigration to Israel. The Palestinians, broadly, are those who were left after the diaspora. More or less, it has never been a separate country. It is an undefined area with both Arabs, meaning Palestinians, and Jews. And they have been both Muslims and Christians. Yeah. In World War I, that started basically the problem, because the Middle East was split between France and Britain. They had detected oil down there, and they realized oil would be crucial in the future. Therefore, they did in a typical colonial way, they just split the whole area between France and Britain. And it was the foreign ministers, Sykes and Picot, who agreed on this. So France got the blue areas, while England got the red ones. That was their internal agreement in the middle of the First World War. And also then Britain had the so-called Balfour Declaration. That was a declaration from the British Foreign Minister, James Balfour, which he wrote to the International Zionist movement, where this Lord Rothschild was important because he was a member of the parliament in Britain. They said there that the establishment, they secured or agreed on that the Zionist movement could establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But that should not prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, meaning the Arabs. But here, in a classical colonial or imperialistic thinking, Britain said that all Jews all over the world, or rather Zionists all over the world, could go to Palestine and establish a national home for the Jewish people down there. And this has been used ever since. And then they established the myth, a country without a people and a people without a country, meaning there is nobody down there, so all Jews might just as well go there, because it's an open, free country. In 1897, there was approximately 500,000 Palestinians down there and a couple of thousand Jews. But the number of Jews increased very fast. In 1914, already 70,000, and then in 1918, they were 700,000 all in all. 93% of them were Palestinians, where 2 or 3 quarters were Muslims, and they owned 98% of the area. 7% were Jews, owning 2% of the area. But then in the coming years, more than 300,000 Jews arrived during the next 15 years. The legal nation established after the First World War, meaning that time's United Nations, they gave, let's say, Palestine, or they told that Britain should have control of Palestine, called it the British Mandate area. That means British military rule. And the reason for this, just as in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, the reason for this was, of course, oil down there, which Britain wanted to have. So the League of Nations gave Britain the responsibility to have control of Palestine. That created a lot. This is the area that was defined by the League of Nations as Palestine. So that was the area ruled by the British from 1922 to 1947, when there was a huge influx of Jews. And that, of course, created problems, revolts, strikes, etc. When the Jews got hold of more and more areas and more influx of Jews disturbing the area. So there was let's say, there was a conflict between the Jews and the Arabs, Palestinians, and there was conflict between the Palestinians and the British military rule, and there were conflicts between the Jews and the military rule. So there was a three-corner, let's say, conflict going on. Then came the Second World War and the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were exterminated, together with 400,000 gypsies and Romans, 250,000 handicapped and homosexuals and other minorities and political opponents. In all in all, between 9 and 11 million people were exterminated by the Nazis. And after that war, Europe had a problem. What should they do with the 3 million surviving Jews who had lost everything, property, family, etc.? They had nothing. 3 million people in the midst of Europe. What to do about that? The experience of the Holocaust, of course, created a trauma for all the Jews who had been through this. And therefore, immigration to Palestine, partly illegal, started immediately after the war. But the British tried to stop it, but they managed to slip through somehow. And in 1947, the minority of 7% 30 years earlier had now increased to 33% of the population. And they owned 7% of the land in 1947. The United Nations, established after the Second World War, one of the first things they did, international politics, was the UN Resolution 181. They voted with a small majority for a non-binding proposal for a split of the area of Palestine, the British Mandate area. They said it should be parted in 2 states, that they were proposed it should be parted in 2 states, where the Jews were given 55% of the area, while they were only 30% of the population. And the Palestinians got 44% of the area with 70% of the population. And in addition, and the Jews were given the red areas, and that was the most fruitful of the area, while the West Bank was more cliff-high mountains, etc. So all the Arab states voted against this split. And the Zionists movement and the Palestinians didn't have voting rights in the UN at that time. The US and Britain abstained from this plan, meaning they didn't vote. They kept quiet. But Soviet, they voted for. So it was a small majority of European countries who voted for this plan. That created an local or internal war first, going on for half a year or something. And then the 14th of May 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the Jewish state. which says, by virtue of our natural and historic right and on the strength of the resolution of the United Nations, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, meaning it was a state for the Jews, basically, and it is in Eretz Israel, meaning the Torah defined huge area, the greater Israel. So already there, it is stated that this is a Jewish state and it has no defined borders, which is, according to all normal definitions, is apartheid or racist. The following day, the Arab neighboring states attacked Israel because they disagreed on both the proposal and the establishment of that state. That war continued for approximately a year, and in 1949 there was a truce where Israel managed to, or the Jews managed to conquer some more areas, which you see here on the picture. But the West Bank came under Jordanian rule, and Gaza and the part there under Egyptian rule, because they had their armies there. So that was basically when Israel was established and the West Bank and Gaza was defined in areas. That war created the Al-Nakba, where Israeli paramilitary groups terrorized the Palestinian villages with the purpose of, let's say, getting the Palestinian population out of the area. There was massacres in Deir Yassin, Ilabun, etc., etc. With, for example, Irgun and a couple of others, Israeli paramilitary or terrorist groups assassinated, slaughtering Palestinian civil people, elderly, women, kids, etc. So 350 Palestinian villages were ruined, and 750,000 Palestinians fled in horror. There, that is 90% of the Arab population in the area. This Nakba is a trauma among Palestinians. And now they call the expulsion of people in Gaza as Al-Nakba #2. This expulsion of people was long ignored or denied in Israel. And it was 25 years ago by an Israeli researcher called Ian Papé. He was the one to publicize the truth and what really happened there in 1948. He was threatened to death by Israelis. He had to flee Israel and is now living in exile in London. UN couldn't accept this, and they had a resolution on Palestinian refugees saying that they have the right to return. And if they choose not to return, the Israeli state should compensate the damage or losses. That was a part of the decision of the human rights, which was established by the UN the day after the Declaration on Human Rights, where everybody has the right to leave any country, including their own, and to return. And another article says nobody should be deprived their property, meaning they have the right to get refunded if they leave the area by the occupying power. Israel, on its own, adopted in 1950 the so-called law on absentee, saying that if an owner of a land or property is not on his area for 2 years, then Israel has the right to confiscate that property. So that means that huge areas in Israel was came under the Israeli state ownership because the refugees were denied to get back to their own areas, villages, etc. There has been a lot of UN decisions related to Israel, not only the right to return. Israel also approved and let's say accepted as a state in the United Nations under the condition that the resolution 194, meaning right to return, was implemented by Israel. That was never done by Israel. And also they said that Israel has to withdraw from the occupied areas after the 48 war. They didn't. And also the whole settlement policy is also condemned by the UN, never taken into account by Israel. Israel is the only country established through a UN resolution, and since then, more or less, never have acted according to other UN resolutions. In 1967, there was another war, the so-called 6 Days War, where Israel took over the whole area. And then started Yasser Arafat with the PLO, guerrilla war, etc., and lots of clashes all along. And then came the Oslo Agreement in 1993. The two-state solution, the idea of this was established. But that is not a peace deal. It's a declaration of principles. They agreed that they should agree on peace. And there was a 5-year plan for this, which was never implemented. The first thing which was implemented was the Oslo II agreement, where the whole West Bank and Gaza were split in 3 kinds of zones. An area A with Palestinian civil and security responsibility. That was the big cities for the Palestinians. You had the B area where Palestinian civil society should rule or administer, but it was the Israel security, meaning the Israeli military. And then you had the area C, with Israeli civil and security control. That was 60% of the area. So that means that the Palestinians were left with control of only 1/5 of the less than half they got by the UN plan in 1947. This created an ocean, an Israeli-controlled ocean, where the Palestinians had control of some smaller islands in the area. But if they wanted to go from one island to the other, from Bethlehem to Ramallah, or Hebron to Nablus or whatever, they were subject to Israeli control because they had no power. The Israeli military had the control of the whole area. And therefore, also the building of the settlements where Orthodox Jews, believing that this land was given to them by God and they had the right to settle down on this Palestinian land, they believed. They started building settlements all over. That was when the more radical part of the Palestinians started with the suicide bombing, which really frightened the Israelis. And Israel started building the wall for security purposes, meaning stopping the Palestinians from entering into Israeli areas. This colonial, what is called colonial separation wall, is a huge thing. And if it had been made on Israeli land, that would be no problem. That it would not be against international law, but it was built on Palestinian land, meaning building new fences around the Area A cities, which made it impossible for Palestinians to travel. Here is a Palestinian village. The road there is where this wall is being built. The problem is that the Palestinians living there, they have their olive trees and their cattle, etc., on the green areas. So that means that they were stopped from using that land. So a lot of farmers, they got out of work. because they were not allowed to pass the gates in the wall, getting to their farmland. And it's not easy to climb over such a wall with goats. So that means it took a lot of the land. 600,000 Palestinians directly hampered in their movement, 42,000 locked in by this wall. This is the checkpoint between Jerusalem and the main, let's say, the capital of the Palestinians in Ramallah. There is 10 kilometers in between. You have to go through these locks if you have a paper or a license to enter into the Israeli areas. So this is a lecture of how to destroy a two-state solution, where the initially prehistoric or pre-1948 historical Palestine has changed into small islands controlled by the Israelis. And then the clashes continued with the Al-Aqsa Intifada and the reoccupation of the West Bank, the Second Gulf War, etc., etc. Then the international society demanded elections in Palestine, as I told before, and in 2005, Hamas win this, to their own surprise and to the surprise of the whole world. But it was obvious they won on both West Bank and Gaza. This was not accepted by the international society because Hamas denied the existence of Israel. So they were, let's say, nobody wanted to cooperate with Hamas. So there was a kind of a shootout on the West Bank, and the Fatah, the other Israeli-friendly faction of the Palestinians, they won political power in the West Bank, but Hamas managed to stay in power in Gaza. So the question is, what and who is Hamas? Hamas is a part of the Muslim Brotherhood established in Egypt in 1947 as, say, a protest against westernization of the Arab world, and pretty orthodox religious-wise, with a belief in the old Quran, meaning it was back to orthodox explanation of the Quran. So basically, it was a religious movement. It was a local group of the Muslim Brotherhood established in Gaza, for Gaza. So it was not international, it was a local thing. It was very popular because it was basically a social welfare organization. They were the ones who was running the schools, the kindergartens, health clinics, hospitals, etc., etc. So they got popular because they took care of the social questions, which Ramallah, where the headquarters of the Palestinian PLO were established, didn't manage to do that in the same way as Hamas. But in the same time, they also had a military branch, the so-called Qassam brigades, and they denounced or did not accept Israel as such, as a state, because Israel was established without the approval of neither the Arab states nor the Palestinians, nor the Zionists in the beginning. This declaration by the UN was not approved by any of the countries down there. And therefore, Hamas says that, no, we can't accept that. It's not democratic. And that was why they were, let's say, with support from the US and Israel, several other states did not accept Hamas because they did not accept Israel. But basically, it is a religious movement, but then social welfare in addition. Israel then isolated Gaza completely with a siege, walls, barbed wires, machine guns, etc., etc. Locked the whole thing up and controlled everything going in and out of the area. Hamas started, as they said, they had the right to defend themselves because Israel was occupying. And therefore, they fired some rockets towards Israel, and then came the first war in 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead, where a number of schools, including this one with Majid, was completely destroyed, etc., and many, many. That was the first time Israel used white phosphorus in their warfare, which is illegal according to all international laws. So by that time, I was sent in by the United Nations to help in re-establish schools and kindergartens, etc. So I worked down there for a year and a half. Sorry, this is in Norwegian. Gaza is 40 kilometers long and 6 to 12 kilometers across, meaning it's a small area. 2 million, more than 2 million, 2.2, I think it is now, people live there, of which more than half is refugees and more than half is under the age of 18. They have no airport, no international, what's it called, harbor, have no control over their borders. Everything is controlled by either Israel or Egypt. And Egypt is afraid of Gaza because it is the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, they won the elections in Egypt after the Arab Spring. But just a year after, the military took a coup and wiped out the Muslim Brotherhood and killed the democratically elected president from Muslim Brotherhood. Since then, Egypt has been a military dictatorship, and therefore they are afraid of Hamas. So they are also afraid of all the refugees trying to get from out of Gaza and into Egypt. They don't want them because they are afraid of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. The area are not self-supporting regarding food, water, or anything. They depend on import of everything, and that means from Israel. It could have been a paradise, huge city, and a fantastic beach to the Mediterranean. Beautiful, but overcrowded. This is the harbor, fishermen boats, but they are denied going out fishing, or rather they are allowed to go out for a kilometer or so, but not more, because out there it's big fish, and they are only allowed to fish in shallow water, because out there Israel has found gas. So they are now building gas installations. So the fishermen are not allowed to go there. And that means that Israeli gunboats are traveling back and forth outside Gaza. And whenever a fisherman is getting too far out, they start shooting. And that they have done since 2008. And to get inside Gaza, this is the only entry point to get from Israel into Gaza. This door, checkpoint area, totally controlled, an 8-meter wall, machine guns, videos, etc., etc. Everything you bring with you is checked. And there's a limit of 300 people a day to pass through that door. That is the entrance for humans to get into Gaza. They have a similar at the Rafah into the Egyptian border. And they have a couple of others, but that is only for goods. And that means that Gaza has had 20 years of siege isolation within Israeli control of borders, and that has totally ruined the economy. And devastated a lot with attacks, etc. This is a school with the boys there. It's a classroom where still bullet holes from the last, or from one of the clashes. Before the last war, there was 80% unemployment, 70% under the poverty line, etc., etc. Totally ruined economy. Surviving on international aid, which is then approved, checked, and approved by the Israelis to get into the area. A 15-year-old in Gaza have experienced 5 wars. And of course, that gives a lot of problems with traumas, psychosocial problems, etc., which was one of the questions I was working with while I was there. And then there is some random bombings. This is from a school. The Israelis said they were attacking a Hamas headquarters, a building just beside there. Well, this is a so-called collateral damage, where that school was destroyed. When I was going into there, entering the area to report to the United Nations in New York the damages, then some pupils saw me coming and they asked if they could join because they wanted to fetch their textbooks. So they were crawling around in the classroom, finding their textbooks and bringing them back home. And that shows also what importance they put on education. Yeah, this is just from a kindergarten now. So the situation before the current war was that Gaza was controlled by Hamas, West Bank by Fatah, 2 different political fractions of the PLO. But efforts for a coalition between them have failed because they disagree completely on the approval of Israel as a state. And they claim various things, and yeah, they disagree. They don't manage to cooperate on this question. Gaza is besieged and closed. Israel controls transportation of goods, services, and everything out in and out. And Egypt, as a military dictatorship, is afraid of Hamas and keeps the borders in Gaza closed. Palestine is approved as an observer in the UN, but US vetoed in the Security Council Palestine as a member of the UN. And now Israel has an increasing right-wing government where the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, and implacable religious Jews have huge power. That is an internal problem in Israel, where Netanyahu depends on, let's say, these Orthodox Jews in order to stay in power. And he has to stay in power, but because he is, let's say, his, what's it called? He was, the legal, there's a legal question because he was corrupt in his last presidency or as prime minister, and therefore he is immune while he is a prime minister. But as soon as he loses political power, then he will be brought to court for corruption. So he has to stay in power and therefore cooperate with the Orthodox movement in Israel. And the West Bank is occupied. Daily clashes in this. There lots of organizations say that this is completely in breach with international law and it is apartheid. In the occupied areas, Palestinians are subject to military law, while the settlers, they are subject to civil law, which is much more easy. And therefore, all youngsters who, for example, throw a stone against Israeli soldiers is arrested and taken to court, or rather they are in prison. So there is a lot of Israeli youngsters, meaning under 18, that are in Israeli jail without trial. And that is the question with the, let's say, the hostages in Gaza, which is being exchanged with Palestinians in Israeli jails. Yeah, this is daily situation in Hebron, where there were some security questions, and then the Israelis just closed the streets, and the kids are not allowed to get to school. So in Israel, approximately 20% of the population are Palestinians, but Israel declared 2 years ago a new law stating that Israel is for Jews, and that means apartheid. In the occupied areas, according to the UN, but which Israel disagree, the Palestinians do not have the same right as Israel. And poverty and unemployment are continuously increasing. And for the time being, under this war, the situation is extreme. A friend of mine in Bethlehem, he doesn't dare go to work, to the university, because there are settlers roaming the street in Palestinian Bethlehem. So he has been staying home now for a month. Israel has experienced the biggest internal conflicts demonstration ever in its history, due to that the most right-wing government tried to reduce the power of the Supreme Court. That is another move by Netanyahu in order to take more power and stay in power. And this has been a huge question with thousands upon thousands of Israelis demonstrating, but that was until the war. Because then came October 7th, when Hamas terror attacks on Israel. I do not understand how they managed to get out, because that wall has been closed for 20 years with nobody coming in and out without Israeli approval. And suddenly you have thousands crossing the gates and the fences, then committing terror attacks on these music festival and on the kibbutz.
Excuse me. How can you say something about Hamas that they are doing terrors on Israel?
No,
you should take care of what you are saying.
Yeah.
Because whatever you said from the beginning until now shows that nobody is terror but Israel. So please take care of what you are saying.
Yeah,
I'm Palestinian. I'm from
thanks.
West Bank. I'm
Thanks.
from Bethlehem. I'm 29 years old. I lived there all my life, and I know better than anyone.
Thanks. Because now I'm just using the words of the, let's say, put it, the international society.
I don't care what the international society says, because all these problems is from the international societies.
Yeah.
By the way, I am a third-year PhD student in military science, and I am working of the role of international organization in making peace in case of Palestine.
Thanks.
What is terrorism? Even the international society didn't agree on what it is.
But that is also why I said earlier that Gaza has the right to defend itself. The Palestinians
Exactly. Thank you so much.
have the right to defend themselves, not Israel, because they are occupiers. I completely agree.
Okay, and there is something else about Yasser Arafat. He didn't die, he was killed.
Yeah, agree.
So there's a differences when we are playing with the word. It means a lot. So please just be careful with what you're saying.
And that is also the problem with, let's say, giving lectures about this. It depends very much on the audience, because I have to sometimes be careful with what I say, because otherwise the audience will be, let's say, angry with me because I'm too Palestinians or whatever. So I have to try to put to the let's say audience sometimes how I pronounce the self or name it. But I fully agree with you. Fully agree. So it is Israel who is the terrorizer in this whole situation. The Palestinians have the right to self-defense. Yeah. And that is the situation. This is the Al-Nakba number 2, where the Israelis force the civil population and with some claims or that it order them to leave there, which is in fact impossible. And then they say afterwards, when they start bombing, it's their own fault. They didn't leave hospitals or whatever. Almost 20,000 Palestinians killed, including more than 8,000 children. More than 2 million people in an area the size of an average European capital were hermetically or totally isolated. And then they started bombing and also stopping import of food, water, diesel, medicines, and humans. This is nothing but genocide. 1.9 million people are internally displaced, having to leave North Gaza, going to Rafah in the south, before they started bombing, and thereafter ground forces attacking, also in the south. And the hypocrisy of the West is that they, let's say, talk about what Putin what he is doing in Ukraine. If Putin had done the same as Israel is doing, then just think about what the West would have said about Putin. But regarding Israel, they are pretty quiet. So this is the question of the West against the rest. The UN Security Council has no power because the US vetoes everything anti-Israeli in order to keep up their weapon export to Israel and the sale of weapons and ammunition and bombs, etc., etc. UN Secretary Guterres, he said that 7th of October did not happen in a vacuum. And by that, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations asked him to step down as Secretary General because this was anti-Israeli. Just the idea to call the Secretary General anti-Israeli in such a situation is just crazy. And several others in the United Nations, etc., have in fact left their positions. The High Commissioner on Human Rights resigned because this is genocide. That he did a month ago. And the head of the International Criminal Court in Hague, an independent international criminal court, he tried to enter Gaza to check war crimes, but he was prohibited by Israel. The UN General Assembly, that is 4 weeks ago, adopted a proposal for ceasefire. All the so-called third world countries voted for this, but most of the Western countries, in fact, with the exception of Norway, voted against or abstained. The voting showed that this is a situation where you have the West against the rest related to the Israeli bombing and terror on Gaza. This is again 11th of September, the Iraq war, etc. The West against the rest, which shows the colonial basic thinking in the West against those down there somehow. So the question is, how will this end? Israel has never stated their aim, their final aim with it, except kill Hamas. But the question is in Gaza, who is not Hamas? Everybody is. And if you look at the people getting killed, then you have children as Hamas. There is no definition of this. They imply to take over the security of the whole strip, but that will be a total military occupation. And also they have the idea of establishing a refugee camp in Sinai Desert in Egypt. And that will be another al-Nakba or ethnic cleansing, definitely, which Egypt opposed. In fact, that was a part of the so-called peace plan, which Trump started working on. There was a proposal there to establish a camp for Palestinians in the Sinai Desert. So there is no, let's say, clear outcome of this because Israel is not clear what they want except kill Hamas. Yeah, and then you have the juridical questions with genocide, war crimes, etc. And that has to be a work for the lawyers. And the question is a one or a two-state solution, which in this situation is more or less impossible. Jerusalem, who is supposed to have control? It was defined by the UN to be an international city. It has never been. It has been occupied by Israel all the time. 750,000 Jewish settlers are now living on occupied West Bank areas. They won't move voluntarily. They think that this country is given to them by God, and they are willing to fight the Israeli army and government in order to stay. And then you have the problem with the split between Fatah and Hamas still. The Orthodox Jews dream of a bigger Israel, and you have 1/5 of the Israeli population, in fact, Palestinians. and Netanyahu depending on the Orthodox Israelis for his government. And then you have the interest of the US, Russia, the Arab states, China, etc., etc. So there is a lot of it's not possible to solve that conflict internally because there are so many foreign actors with their interests in the whole area. So the question is if the Orthodox Israel really mean to expel Palestinians out of all Eretz Israel. And we are talking about more than 5 million on the West Bank and 2.1 million in Gaza. This is from a summer camp in Gaza in 2010, where lots of children had a show. It was fantastic. And the spirit which this whole thing showed says that states that Israel will never be able to, let's say, control Palestinians. They will fight to the bitter end somehow. So this is Banksy. It's a wall painting inside Bethlehem, where the peace dove has to carry a vest and let's say bulletproof vest when it tries to deliver olive branches. And it's a picture from a refugee camp in Bethlehem. Here only butterflies and birds are free. That was an old painting. And this is the dream by Banksy. So education. But we have to educate Israel so that they start realizing what they are doing. Yeah, I think that's it. I spent 10 minutes more than I was supposed to. Questions, comments? I'm very glad for your intervention. You from Bethlehem. I'm very happy. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I was really interested when I saw the Zoom meeting. And to be honest, you gave the history in very good details because I'm also doing my thesis about this. So it's only one chapter from my thesis. So thank you so much. You gave me like another conclusion for the history. So good job and thank you so much.
But you are staying in Bethlehem now, or where are you?
No, I'm in Hungary.
You're in Hungary. Okay.
Yes. I hope if we can maybe get a contact or something later on, it would be a pleasure for my educational journey.
Yes, pleasure.
Thank
You
you.
just go through Sarah. You get
I will do
paid.
that. Thank you so much.
I have a very good friend in Bethlehem, Dr. Sami Adwan, who used to work on the Bethlehem University. I've been working with him since 1995. Very close.
I got graduated from Bethlehem University 2016,
Ah.
sociology minor, journalism, and then I moved to Hungary. I did my master degree and now I'm doing my PhD.
Oh, wow.
So of course we know someone because Bethlehem is very small city, so everybody knows everybody.
Yeah. And I also know what's his name again? He's running this natural science museum close to the wall.
I think the museum is closed now.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
No, thank you so much. Very nice. Your job.
Thanks. Okay, if there is no other questions or comments, then we might just close it, Sarah.
Yes, thank you very much, Oyvind. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know, and it gave me a lot of food for thought. Yes, if anybody has questions later on, you can email me. You all have my email address. And then I will get you in contact. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Oyvind, once again. And yes, Julia, I will reach out to you.
Thank you.
Okay, then we leave it at this for today. And I wish you a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Goodbye.